Well, hello everyone. Welcome to sunny Wales. When I left yesterday from my home, my neighbour saw me and said, you got some cases, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Wales. He said, well, what are you going to be doing in Wales? I'm going to be talking about depression. He said, well, I hope you come back a little happier than when you left. I said, well, no, there is actually good news about depression. Because the good news about depression is that you can prevent it and you can get rid of it. Now, that actually doesn't sound too scientific, because we talk to most psychiatrists, and I have many family members who are psychiatrists, and they say, well, we don't cure people from depression. We manage people's depression. What does that mean? That means that we give you routines, medication that can help you live with depression. But that has always never meant sense to me. It's a bit like what we do with diabetes. People give you medication and treatment to manage your diabetes, manage your blood pressure. But I think most people would want to get rid of these diseases. So we're going to look over the next few days at what we can do to prevent and reverse depression. If we can have the screen up, please. And depression is linked to stress and anxiety. And over the next few days, what we're going to do is start quite superficially and then get a little deeper, because there are physical causes for depression. There are emotional causes for depression. There are spiritual reasons for depression. And if those are the reasons, it makes sense that there must be physical, emotional, and spiritual reasons to get rid of depression. That makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, so let's have a start. If you were to scour the depth of information that we have in this world, and you could go to the utter reaches of the universe, there is one thing that is so highly complicated, so wonderfully put together, that even man today, we don't understand it well. And that is the human brain. There is nothing as complicated that we've ever seen in the world as a human brain. We know that we have over 100 billion nerve cells. 100 billion nerve cells. Each nerve has at least 1,000 connections, so they're connected to 1,000 different nerves. I mean, that means you have the equivalent of, think about the Amazon rainforest. It's a vast expanse. Think of all the trees you have in the Amazon rainforest. Think of all the leaves on all the trees of the Amazon rainforest. That is the order of magnitude of connections we have in our brains. It's absolutely vast. We have a brain that can do something like 50,000 trillion operations every second. 50,000 trillion operations. That's works, that's movements every single second. The best supercomputer that we've ever come up with, and these supercomputers, they can actually fill a whole hall, right? These are the computers that can tell us what the weather's going to be like tomorrow and the next few months. The best supercomputer can only do 0.01% of what the brain can do. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. Now this, you may not believe what I'm about to say next, but this is absolutely true. You can check it up, all right? The capacity of our brain is 1 quadrillion bytes. I don't even know how to count that far. I don't even know what it looks like. But it's the same amount of information that you will find on the internet. One brain can store the same amount of information that you can find on the internet today. That is truly amazing. And you know what? When the brain is working right, when it's working perfectly and everything's going along, we can do some amazing things. We have people like this gentleman, Albert Einstein. Remember him? Now, he was able to come up with calculations that determined the universe, motions, bodies, everything. It's wonderful when the brain is working right. When we cooperate together, we can build things like the International Space Station. This is the most expensive, the most difficult thing we've ever put together when we've cooperated on Earth. But I would like to say, occasionally, things can go wrong. Occasionally, things can go wrong. And in order to illustrate it, I'd like to introduce you to somebody who you may have never heard of, Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage, he worked on the railways back in the 1840s. And what he was a foreman. And one day, he was walking down the railways and he was packing down some explosives into the railway to break up the rocks. Now, as he was packing down this explosive, the explosive blew up. The rod that he was pressing down on the explosive actually flew up and went through his skull. Now, you would think he would die instantly with this. Actually, Phineas Gage was still alive. He was still able to talk to his colleagues. He was able to get himself to hospital. But he continued to live actually another 13 years with this dramatic brain injury to his brain. And this actually started some of modern neuroscience, because the scientists would study him, the psychiatrists would study him. They found that Phineas, before he had the accident, was a very nice guy, very friendly. He liked to cooperate, he liked to share things. After a while, though, after this injury, he started to get a bit depressed. Now, I don't know about you, if I had a big bolt going through my head, I might be a bit depressed too. But the doctors, they continued to study him, and they found that as his brain was becoming more injured, they found that there were parts of the brain that they could start to study about how we have and how we express our emotions. So this was really some of the beginnings of neuroscience. And this brings us to today, when we have feelings of depression. Feelings of depression. Now, I would suggest that most of us, throughout our life, have had periods of low mood, right? I don't think I'm alone in having those feelings. I think most of us have been through that. But depression is slightly more than that. Okay, depression is when you can have certain signs and symptoms that go with it. Sometimes you have a feeling of helplessness. You feel helpless. Often you have feelings of guilt or shame. You have disordinate anger. You know, you can get angry about things that are just so minor, and people will say, "Why are you getting so angry?" You have weight changes. Sometimes you lose weight, sometimes you gain weight. Often you can just lack interest in anything that's going on around you. You can lose interest in your job, lose interest in your relationships, have no real hope for the future. Sometimes you can just spend all day in bed, not necessarily because you're tired, but you just have no enthusiasm to do anything. If you find that you have any of these symptoms or a combination of these symptoms, you should actually get screened for depression. Your doctor, your GP will be able to do that for you. Some of the definitions of depression is that it's a mental condition characterized by feelings of severe despondency and dejection, typically with feelings of inadequacy, guilt, often accompanied by a lack of energy disturbance, of appetite and sleep. It is not a nice position to be in. And actually, what most people say is that it's very difficult to describe it to somebody who's never been through it. I like this definition even better. Depression is anger turned inwards, and anger is depression turned outwards. If you ever meet somebody who's very angry, what psychologists and psychiatrists are saying now is that that anger, that constant anger, depicts that there is something going on inside which is close to, if not exactly, depression. And the depression that we feel is usually directed against ourselves. It's anger directed against ourselves. And as I say, it's difficult to understand. I don't know if any of you watch football at all. I mean, some of us do. I mean, I'm not a great football fan. I used to support Arsenal many years ago, but for my stress levels, I abandoned them. Okay? I didn't want to be too depressed. Okay? But you see these football players and, they make lots of money and they're never really portrayed in a great light, usually in the public. But there have been a few that I would look at, even though I don't know much about football, I would look at a few football players and think, this guy looks like a good guy. This guy, Gary Speed. Gary Speed, he looked to me like a normal football player. He had a normal life, he was never in the media for any drug abuse or alcoholism or anything like that. So not only was he a good football player, he played for his country. He then went on to manage his country. So he managed Wales. Here we are in Wales. He was the manager for the Welsh football team. Had a wonderful wife, supportive, kind. Everything seemed to be great for that guy. But then I found out, and I remember being shocked by the news, that one day his wife came home and he'd hung himself. You look at this guy who has everything going for him. People would kill to be in his position. But there was something overcoming him that, despite all that he had around him, he could not stand living. He would rather leave this world than live the life that he had. So that's what depression is. It looks to us irrational. And when you look at somebody who's depressed, you might think, well, why don't you just cheer up, man? It's not possible just to do that. Sometimes even saying that makes them feel worse. Because what you're saying to them is, you've got no reason to be down. You've got no reason to be depressed. And that makes them feel even more guilty. There were some other famous people who had depression. Abraham Lincoln was depressed. For a lot of his life, he was depressed. It was triggered by many different things, the death of his son. But he was able to achieve great things, even with depression. We know Winston Churchill was depressed. He constantly talked about this black dog that he lived with, the black dog being depression. Again, he was still able to achieve many things, even though he was depressed. So let's just take a wind back and let's go back to the actual structure of our brain and find out what is actually going on when we're depressed. So this is a neuron. A neuron is a nerve cell. In order for your brain to work, neurons must communicate with each other. They send signals to one another, and that's exactly how the brain works. Now, in order for a neuron to work, it has to have its cell body. That's here. That's the nucleus. That's the most of the cell body. This long place here is the axon, and that's where the signal passes down. So the signal can start here, passes down the axon, goes to these little finger-like projections called dendrites, and it goes on to another cell. That's how neurons communicate with each other. If we do a close-up, this is what a synapse looks like. This is the join between one nerve and another. And this is the area where psychiatrists and drug companies try to use much of their efforts. this little synapse, because between one nerve and another nerve, in order to communicate, they have to release chemicals. And these chemicals are called neurotransmitters. Okay. Now, what a drug company would like to do is to increase the number of neurotransmitters in that synapse. The more of certain neurotransmitters there are, the happier you feel. Okay. There is a certain neurotransmitter here called serotonin. Serotonin. And if you take a drug called a serotonin selective reuptake inhibitor, like Prozac, it will keep the levels of serotonin high and your mood increases. So this is a physical way that we increase mood. And this is some of the places where drugs will work. So they'll work by blocking the reuptake of serotonin. Serotonin is the yellow there. So sometimes, once they've done their work, they usually get taken back into the cell. But a SSRI, Prozac, will block the reuptake of serotonin into that cell. So that means your mood actually increases. And these are the actual drugs, Prozac. I won't ask if you've ever taken it. It's a very common drug. They're even giving it to dogs now, because you know dogs are getting depressed. I think this must tell us that it's a lifestyle illness. You know, since when did dogs get depressed? And we know that they get better because they feel happier. They start wagging their tails more. But as with all drugs, they have side effects, right? With all drugs, they have side effects. And let me just explain a little bit how the brain works. You see, the brain likes to remain as it is. It doesn't like any external help from us. It doesn't like to have any drugs in its environment. If you give the brain a drug, it will do everything to combat the effect of that drug, whether you like it or not. So, if you block this receptor from taking up serotonin because you want more serotonin to be in the synapse, your cell, this nerve, will make more receptors to take up more serotonin. So if it takes up more serotonin, then your mood will go down. So you'll need even more drug to make yourself feel better. That's what we call tolerance. Now, if you take this drug away and you've got more receptors taking up the drug, rather than you feeling better, you feel even worse than you did before because you have even less serotonin in your system. So one of the bad effects of drugs, if you withdraw quickly, is that you feel even more suicidal. And many of these drugs have been linked to suicide because they've not been managed properly. By the way, this is very much similar to lots of recreational drugs. You know, we hear a lot about cannabis and ecstasy in society right now. The Liberal Democrat Party has taken a lead in trying to focus on mental health in society, which is good. We must support that. But at the same time, they want to legalize cannabis. Now that to me makes no sense. We know that cannabis predisposes people to mental health issues. I mean, even when I was studying many years ago pharmacology, and I remember sitting in a lecture, and the professor was talking about drugs that we use to treat schizophrenia. And they said, well, before we can test drugs on human beings, we have to test it on animals, like rats. And I was thinking to myself, how do you get a schizophrenic rat? I have never seen a schizophrenic rat. You know, most rats seem to be quite healthy to me. So after the lecture, because I didn't want to embarrass myself, I said, well, you know, I went up to the professor, how do you get a rat to be schizophrenic? And he said, oh, fine, that's quite easy. We just pump them full of cannabis. You give these rats cannabis, they get into a state that we believe to be schizophrenia. Then we test these drugs on them, and if they get better, we think that it can probably help with schizophrenia. Now, they've done these tests for many, many decades. It seems to work. So we know, and we've always known, cannabis predisposes to schizophrenia. Why do people take cannabis? They take it because they want to chill out, right? Yeah, it gives them a nice, relaxed feeling. You know that, don't you? No, you don't know. I'm just testing. I'm just testing. So, but going back to that example, if you take cannabis because you want to chill out, your brain does not like the interference. Your brain will then start to produce chemicals and proteins that will do the opposite of making you chill out. It will make you more alert, right? So it says, no, I don't like this relaxed state. I'll make you more alert. Now, if you take away the cannabis, you've got all these extra proteins making you more alert. So it starts off that you are hyper alert, a little bit paranoid, schizophrenic. That's the progression that happens with some schizophrenia. Not all schizophrenia is caused by drug abuse, by the way, but especially in young people, one of the biggest causes of schizophrenia is drug abuse. And you can just take cannabis once and it can happen. In the media today, they're talking about, oh, yeah, well, only if you take the strong type of skunk cannabis, that can cause mental illness. No, it can happen to any one of us, and you can take it just the once. So always avoid it. You know, I always ask the question, why do we have to take drugs in the first place? Why aren't we doing more to give people alternatives than having this artificial lifestyle? I think I've managed to get through life without smoking, drinking, or taking any drugs. I don't feel I've missed out. I really don't feel I've missed out. And if we face problems in life, perhaps we should actually face them, not take drugs to mask them. Anyway, that's another lecture, I guess. Let's move on. So we're looking at some of the physical causes for depression. So there must be some physical causes for reversing depression. And one of the ways is some of the things that we can eat. Okay, some of the things we can eat. Dietary protein have amino acids like tryptophan. Tryptophan is a wonderful amino acid, and that is the precursor to making serotonin. So rather than having Prozac, you can make your own serotonin and be happy by eating the right type of food. What sort of things do you have to eat? So bananas are top of the list, actually. Bananas have loads of tryptophan. That's why monkeys are so happy, obviously. Right? So it's packed with tryptophan. Green vegetables, nuts like walnuts and almonds, packed with serotonin and tryptophan. So things like green smoothies will be fine, absolutely, that helps. Cayenne pepper, that does, but you can only have so much of that. Oats are very high in tryptophan. So these things, these plant-based goods that we can eat, actually give us our natural serotonin, our natural high. And there are no side effects. In fact, the only side effects you have from eating this is having a healthier lifestyle. So it's positive all the way, absolutely all the way. Exercise, we know. A Harvard study in 2011 told us that just by exercising an hour a day is more effective than taking any antidepressant for people with moderate or low depression. Exercising for 1 hour a day is better than any drug that we can take. Now, by the way, if you have severe depression, or if you're at the point of suicide, exercise is not going to work for you. Most people, if they're suicidal, they're not even going to go out and exercise anyway, are they? If you're severely depressed, you can't even get up out of bed, telling somebody to exercise is not actually going to work. But if you're feeling low of mood, or you find that you're periodically going down, just getting into a decent exercise program, making sure you're eating the right sort of diet, actually that will raise your mood. It doesn't happen instantly, folks. You have to give it a week or so. So just keep trying, and it will definitely improve. We know that exercise changes not just your body, but also your mind, your attitude, and your mood. So this is something physical that we can do. When anybody comes to me who is low in mood, I always give them these simple tips. The first one is, look, the best thing you can do is just get out of the house an hour a day and walk. You know what, just going out and walking. I remember I found this when I was walking to work. I used to have about an hour's walk to work. And just by walking in the quiet in the morning, it's not just the exercise, it's actually the freedom your mind has. You're not in front of a TV, you're not in front of a computer screen. I don't even have to listen to music, but that freedom, and that time you can have for thought, that time you can have for prayer even, that improves your mood dramatically. You know, depression is really linked to many of the other lifestyle diseases. Depression, stress, anxiety. You could actually say that some of the triggers for things like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, all of those things can be found in depression, anxiety, and stress. So these are just some of the physical things that we can deal with. We're going to go on and get a bit deeper, because there's more than your diet, there's more than what you exercise, because you know what? Sometimes even if you exercise and you come back from exercising, you're still going to feel quite rough, right? There is depression that goes even deeper than what exercise can do, and we're going to deal with more of that tomorrow and the day after. For now, though, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. If you have no questions, I'm happy to leave. No questions. Do we have any mics here? Okay, if you say your question, and then I'll repeat it while they're looking for the mics. There's a mic coming.
Good morning, Church. It is unfortunate that we have seen examples who have been cited to have suffered depression in its different forms, but they are people not like me. Many of us, people of color, we seem not to have gathered history of them. As such, our people, we don't regard depression as coming to us. And even the use of these drugs, or the use of new treatments, if we may call it, we seem to be saying to ourselves, it doesn't come to us. And within our societies, meaning people of color like me, we are also not opening up to our children to tell them what cannabis does to them. Because maybe we inherited a culture whereby our parents or our forefathers were saying, well, you can just take cannabis as something you see in the bush and you can go by it. And our children are not really well informed of what will be the side effects. And as well, this diet thing to us, our communities, we are not teaching ourselves more to really go down and understand what diet is doing to us and our children.
Okay, thank you. And yes, it's a very good point, but I would say that it's not limited to any culture. It's not limited to any culture at all. In Great Britain, all races, creeds, colors, sexes, ages of people are suffering with this. All of us are. One of the problems is that we don't tend to talk about it much. I think it's great in the media now that more people are talking about it. More people are confessing the fact that, yes, you might see me in the media, but I do suffer from depression. And it's all races and it's all colours. But we certainly do need to educate our young people. And talking about drugs, my fear is that there is this constant push in the media that soft drugs are okay. Let's legalize them. And I think eventually this country may want to do that. They've done it elsewhere in America and certain parts of Europe. I think it's coming to Britain. I think that's one of the biggest disasters we can do to our children. Because young people, actually, their brains are still developing. Their brains don't fully develop until they reach about 21, 22. Whilst they're developing, if you're getting all these toxins into their brain, it will develop in a different way, in a way that you don't want it to, and it can lead to chronic mental health issues, which are very difficult to treat after that. Yes. Who has the mic? Thank you. There's a mic at the back there.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Chidi, 2 questions. Does diabetes brings on high blood pressure eventually? And also, can diabetes type 2 be reversed? By the way, a doctor told me that if you get diabetes, it's automatically that you will get high blood pressure.
Okay. Diabetes can certainly lead to high blood pressure because diabetes, you've got lots of sugar in your system, your arteries tend to narrow, and that shoots your blood pressure up. Doesn't mean you automatically have it, but type 2 diabetes, I think somebody in the front answered, definitely reversible. Type 2 diabetes is definitely reversible. We do it all the time. Yes.
Dr. Chidi, 2 questions. So a psychology student told me that there is a good link between Christians and depression, especially black Christians. Is there empirical...
It's all this stuff about black Christians and black people. I mean,
is there...
What is it because there's so many people? Go ahead. Go on.
Is there any evidence for that? And the second question is, you said people can use cannabis just once and get psychosis or schizophrenia. Why will that happen?
Yes.
What's going on in the brain that will cause that to happen?
Okay, so your first question was, is there any link between being a Christian and mental health? Okay. What do you think? I heard some people say no, some people say yes. No, let me ask it a slightly different way, because I want your feedback on this. A Christian, what do you think the evidence says? Do you think they show that Christians are more depressed or less depressed? Yes. Oh, confident, less depressed. I heard 1 or 2 people say more. Look, the evidence shows, and we're going to talk about this in some of the later talks, the evidence shows both. Being a Christian can protect you from certain types of mental illness, but it can also predispose you to certain types of mental illness. I'm not going to say too much because we're going to deal with that in a few days, but I'll put it this way. If you feel free to talk about what's going on in your heart, that lessens the predisposition for mental illness. And I'll just ask you, if you feel okay in your church to talk about things that are going on in your heart, well then, your chance of mental illness goes down. If you don't feel free, your risk goes up. Now, I think that's a question for you. How do you feel in your church? We're going to be dealing with that in a few days' time. And the last one, you mentioned about cannabis, just taking it once. How can that actually trigger? So, as I say, we don't know everything, but taking one cannabis joint, it's like taking an insult of a drug. In the same way that you can have one aspirin and have a reaction, a bad reaction, cannabis can, for certain people, and we don't know who, can actually predispose them, or actually not predispose them, but send them into psychosis just with that one joint. So the drugs would have been going through your nervous system, causing you to release certain chemicals, and your body will have such a reaction against it. It will build up such a defense that it turns you into somebody who's psychotic, just on one joint. So do not go near it. If your friends, and I'm talking to adults here, maybe I should be talking to the youth as well, but if any friends tried to offer it to you, it is one of the worst things they can do, because much better to have a physical illness than to have a mental illness that takes your mind away. Awful. And by the way, there's one thing. I mean, my brother-in-law is a psychiatrist. I ask him this all the time. And we'll be dealing with this too. If schizophrenia, you know, one of the symptoms for schizophrenia is that you can hear voices, right? And I often say to these psychiatrists, if it's just a random thing, why is it that all of the voices tell them to do something wrong? Because, you know, if it was just random, you would expect the voices, some to say, well, you know, buy her a bunch of flowers. Help that old lady across the road. They don't tell them to do that. They always tell them to do something wrong. Even the ones that make them sound like they're good, oh, you know, you're brilliant, you're wonderful. Sometimes they hear voices saying, you're fantastic, you're wonderful. They then lead up to, you're fantastic, you're wonderful, you're Superman. Why don't you just jump off that building? All of these voices are telling them to do negative things. If it was random, why should that be? We're going to talk about that later too. Who has the mic here? Thank you.
Yeah, just to go back to the question with the brother who said about black Christians, prayer has actually proved scientifically to enlighten the brains. They've shown scans where lots of the parts of the brain is great, especially if you're very sick. So the problem with Christians who are depressed is if you have unresolved convictions because you feel still you're sinful, and if you don't give it over to Christ, then that can wear you down. But definitely, Christians are the most happy people, and a lot of doctors don't mind nurses who go to the bedside to pray, and they say it's one of the very important healing tools, prayer.
Yes, certainly Christians can be the happiest people, and they should be. But we're not always. When I look into the Bible and I look at David, he had many highs, but he had many lows. We often found that Jesus was a man of sorrows. So we're not always going to be up, bubbly, and light. And I think sometimes telling Christians that they should always be happy makes the problem worse. Because we then start to feel, there's something wrong with me. Everybody else looks happy, because we can all look happy on the Sabbath, right? We can all look happy. But when we go back home, the reality hits us. And if we're always told that we're supposed to be happy, we just feel even more guilt. It makes the problem even worse, and we can't share it with anybody because I don't want them to think that I'm not a proper Christian. So, we'll take a few more. Yes?
Dr. Chili, is it possible that type 2 diabetes, please listen carefully, there's a bush called nickel that they can use? I would like to hear from you.
I didn't quite understand that. I didn't hear that properly.
A bush.
A bush, okay.
Called nickel. Nickel. Nettle.
Nettle. Nettle bush.
Yes.
Yeah?
Can type 2 diabetes help?
Oh, can it help type 2 diabetes? Yeah, I mean, any bush can help diabetes, right? any bush can. And by that, what I mean is, by eating plant-based material, it can help. It can help diabetes. But what you have to understand is what causes type 2 diabetes. If you understand what causes it, you can then reverse it. I'm sure many of you have heard me give talks about reversing type 2 diabetes. I would suggest to you, if anybody's trying to sell you a bush that will cure you from type 2 diabetes, just walk away. It's nonsense. In the same way that there's no drug that can cure you from type 2 diabetes. A bush, a certain type of fruit, can minimize your symptoms, but it will not get rid of the root cause of type 2 diabetes. The root cause of type 2 diabetes is our lifestyle, complete lifestyle. if you change your diet, you can actually make your cells sensitive again to insulin, and type 2 diabetes goes away. But it's not going to happen with a bush, I'm afraid. Who has it? Oh, up there. Wow. Yes.
Hi, Doctor. I was just wondering what studies or recent research you have that correlate the increased oral intake of tryptophan with serotonin levels, if there's anything new that you've read that you've come across.
So can you just ask that question again? What is it you want me to tell you?
You spoke about a correlation between increased dietary intake of tryptophan and serotonin levels, and I was just wondering what research you've come across that supports it.
Yeah, so what you're asking, it sounds like a very scientific person there. What they're really asking is, we were talking about those neurotransmitters, the chemicals that go between the nerves. Some of them are serotonin, tryptophan, 5-HT we call them. Is there any evidence to suggest that by eating certain diets, you can boost that? Yes, there is a study done by, it's a collaboration between Harvard and the University of California, San Francisco. I can't remember the date. I think it's before 2010, actually. And they did studies on diet, they did studies on exercise, and it showed how not just you boost the global mood, but it showed the increase in neurotransmitters by changing the diet. And it also showed that by eating certain things, you can lower your serotonin levels. And obviously, the ones that lower your serotonin levels, the ones that lower your ability to be happy, are the refined sugars. Yeah, refined sugar is one big one. It takes away a lot of the happiness, because you know that you can have a high after sugar, but then after that you have a low. So refined sugar is one of the worst things if you're trying to combat depression as well. Okay, I'll take one more.
Hello.
Oh, hello, yes.
Is there any way back after a young man has taken, and I believe it was only once he took it, now he has mental problems. Is there any way forward in any way for him? I feel quite sad about his situation.
Okay, so you're actually demonstrating that somebody took it once.
Once.
Yeah, and it was cannabis?
Yep.
Okay. So this, it's a soft drug, so-called, cannabis. You take it once. And is it now, what has he got now?
Devastating.
Sorry?
Oh, can you hear me? Yes. It's quite devastating. I think he's had electrolysis, he'd heard voices and tried to do damage to certain people in his family. And that's very bad.
That's very sad. And, what has to be done, you have to make a full assessment. I have seen people who have had psychotic illnesses, psychotic depression, by changing around their lifestyle completely. And it's not just about the diet, definitely not. And it's not just about exercise. Tomorrow and the day after, we're going to be dealing with deeper things that can help to turn you around. And it's more about dealing with what's going on inside, okay? But there's no way that you can turn around the physical damage, but there are ways you can get around it by using the emotional and spiritual repair. Okay, and we're going to be talking about that over the next few days. Okay. I think every time you say last question, people... Well, I guess we've got some time, haven't we? We've got a bit of time. Okay, we'll take a few more. What time do I finish here? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Chidi. My question is this.
Where are you?
With depression, all of us can have low feelings.
Yes.
But is there a difference between is there something chemical in the brain that other people don't have, that a person with depression has more tendency to have?
Okay, so what, before the person gets depressed, is there something that an individual may have that makes them more at risk? Is that what you're asking?
Well, from a chemical point of view, because there was a lady I know, she wanted to get off her, she was on these antipsychotic tablets.
Yeah.
And she wanted to get off them because she said that she felt better. Yeah. The doctor said to her, and it was a psychiatrist that spoke to her, said to her, the reason why you have to stay on these tablets, because if you don't, you will see things that that are not there, and the reason why you will see that, because there are things that are lacking in your brain that are not lacking in other people's. And
Yes.
therefore, the tablets help.
Yeah.
And I think it was to do with the neurotransmitters as well.
That's right. I wonder, is it possible for us to go back to the presentation? I want to just show you. Is that possible? Okay, wait a minute. But what you're saying is absolutely true. Physically, we can see if a person is depressed or if a person is psychotic, we can actually see that they have less neurotransmitters, less serotonin is being fired off. Now, the question has to be, which is not asked, why? You know, we know the physicality. We know, okay, we can test the amount of neurotransmitter. But why should it be that someone with depression produces less? Okay? And in the next 2 days, we're going to be discussing why it actually happens. So because what we've dealt with today is a very superficial look of depression. We've looked at the neurotransmitters, things you can take in, diet, exercise, that's fine. But that doesn't actually describe where does it all come from. Why should a person produce less neurotransmitters than another? Is it a genetic thing? Is it a lifestyle thing? What can cause it? And you'll find that there are defined and definite reasons. Okay, last one. Who gets the last question? Oh, wow. Without even the mic. Okay. Okay, I'll come to yours. I will see you after. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, my question is in regards to, you've spoken a lot about cannabis and the negative
Yes.
effect it has on people.
Yes.
There's a movement on medicinal marijuana.
Yes.
I just wanted to find out what's your intake on that.
Yeah, okay, that's a good and fair question. Medicinal marijuana, we've all heard of that, right? I'm taking it for medicinal use. There are people who have chronic diseases, chronic pain, they'll say, if I smoke marijuana, I feel better. We've all heard this. Cannabis is a drug, okay? Opium is a drug. You take opium, or its derivative, it relieves pain. Heroin, okay? Heroin is a drug. So there are properties in cannabis that can relieve pain. I don't believe that they can do all the things that everybody's talking about, but they can relieve pain. So you can take cannabis in a different form that would produce the same reaction and not cause the mental illness. I would caution you in this way, because you're going to hear a lot about medicinal cannabis, medicinal marijuana. I would ask you to look into the history of the prohibition of alcohol in America. In the 1840s, everybody was getting drunk, and then they made alcohol illegal for a certain period. And everybody who looks at that story says, oh, it was terrible, there was so much crime, there was shooting. Absolutely, that was absolutely true. But I would ask you to look at what was happening in society when there was a prohibition, when alcohol was illegal. I'll tell you what happened. There were lots of people coming up with theories that alcohol is medicinal, so pharmacists should use it. This was part of the push. The people who were allowed to use alcohol were rabbis, because they did their Passover ceremonies. The number of people who became Jewish went up. Right? I'm saying that there is this push, there's this creeping push to find any scintilla of evidence to say that cannabis can be good for us. And it gets promoted in the media. But then what tends to happen is that the young people see this and they say, oh, cannabis must be all right. And more people take it. And we get more mental health problems because of it. We hear arguments like, oh, it will get rid of the crime. I don't understand how it will get rid of crime. Okay, if you legalize cannabis, if I'm a drug dealer of cannabis, do you think I'm just going to say, okay, I'll probably go into selling sweets or something like that? No, if I'm used to selling cannabis and you legalize it, I'll go to the next level. I'll start promoting heroin and pushing heroin and crack cocaine. And then in 20 years' time, people are going to be promoting the legalization of crack cocaine. You know, we have to actually stand quite firm. It is a terrible disease to have your mind taken away, to be hearing voices. So let's not give any opportunity for this. I remember being in a prison once, and I was sitting in front of a man, he must have been in his early 30s, who was constantly looking around like this. And he was saying, look, I can't concentrate on talking to you. I keep hearing voices, and they're telling me to kill people. And the thing that made me even more nervous, he said, especially black people. You know, I wasn't alone in prison. Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. But I'm saying that because even though he said that, I just felt so sorry for him. Imagine hearing those voices day in, day out. If you were not mad to begin with, it would drive you mad. Okay? So we've got to really hold fire. We have the last question before we finish, and it was you. That's right.
Predisposes one to mental illness because the hemp milk come from the hemp seed, which cannabis is from. So that was what I was wondering about.
So does drinking hemp milk predispose you to mental illness? No, it doesn't. And it's in the same way that having poppy seeds, having poppy seeds on your bread, doesn't predispose you to being an opium addict or anything like that, because they're in different forms, okay? Now, people take hemp milk for different reasons, but it doesn't, by drinking the plant, doesn't cause anywhere near the same effects as smoking the plant. It's completely different. So don't worry about that. Anyway, that's a good place to finish. Thank you very much. Tomorrow and the day after, we're going to be going a bit deeper. We've talked superficially about depression. We're going to go deeper into the emotions. I'm going to go deeper into the spirit. We'll see you tomorrow.